Before we go back into the text of Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Life, maybe we start like we often do. Let's start with a little bit of just a few minutes of meditation. So just first to kind of settle our mind, start for a couple minutes of just focusing on the breath. Just focus, on present moment sensations in breath and the out breath. And whenever thoughts or feelings rise, we just notice them, and gently bring our attention back to the breath. Having kind of settled our minds just a little, maybe just take a today we could just take a couple moments to meditate or contemplate on equalizing, what they call this one, equalizing self and other. Then there's after this meditation on exchanging. Well, maybe we'll do that next time. But this meditation on equalizing self and other starts with the recognition that we're going to do a few different um, points. first one is I and others are exactly the same in wanting uh, happiness or well-being and not wanting to suffer. Mhm. And so first you can notice like in yourself, right? You have this, it's like it's totally fundamental part of us that we're all the same. And that, first of all, nobody wants pain or misery. And however one understands happiness or well-being, then one wants that. First of all, actually, this is not unique to human beings. If you watch like birds, squirrels, you know, insects even, nobody wants to be harmed. All beings like move towards what they view as safety, away from threats. Even the tiniest fish is away from what it thinks of as a threat and towards what it thinks of as like food or something that's going to enhance its well-being. And I'm no different. Just as I want to be safe, all humans and all non-humans want to be safe. Just as I don't want to be ill, all humans and non-humans don't want to be ill. Just as I want to feel well, everyone wants to feel well. And that's true of an insect as it is of myself, as it is of the person, sitting close to me. It's equally true of my friends, but also strangers, also people I think of as enemies. We're all the same. And then briefly, if I think about myself and my fellow human beings, we all have concepts. This will be good, meaning it'll enhance my well-being or decrease suffering of myself and those close to me. Or this is bad, right? It'll cause more suffering. And so we're all the same then. We create some concepts and then we act based on those. And we feel based on those. Sometimes my concepts are the same as somebody else's or different than somebody else's. but we're all following our concepts, our ideas of what will bring happiness or decrease suffering. One more way we're the same is that all of us, sometimes our concepts about that are mistaken. For myself and for everyone I know, sometimes what I think of as, well, this will enhance my well-being, actually makes it worse. Sometimes what we think of as that which will, decrease or free us from suffering actually causes our suffering. And so we're all the same in that way also. And if you contemplate on that, right, we all want to be happy, exactly the same. We all don't want to suffer, same as each other. And all of us sometimes develop these wrong concepts that compound our own and others' suffering. And then and that can enhance our sense of compassion. Mm. Where we feel, may I and others be free from those wrong understandings that cause more suffering. And actually, the more distorted, at a certain moment, my own or somebody else's concepts are, actually, the more worthy we are of compassion. The more obvious, at least, it is that we're worthy of compassion. And this text that we're studying is about bodhicitta, right? So it's the wish to achieve enlightenment. So enlightenment, part of enlightenment means understanding what actually leads to happiness, what actually liberates from suffering, right? In order to then thereby free all beings, and myself and all others, from suffering and its causes, and to lead all beings, others, all others, and myself included, to the greatest state of well-being. So just for a moment, we cultivate that kind of mind, right? Well, not just for a moment. The idea here is that we're trying to cultivate that kind of mind, right? A mind of altruism that recognizes we're all the same, wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. Uh, feels, there's nothing else to do but to look for the purpose of my life, purpose of my lives, purpose of my existence. It's just that, to gain wisdom It allows me to free others and also myself from suffering and its causes, to progress in that wisdom so that I can then help myself and others to achieve what we want, which is actual well-being. In whatever degree we can we cultivate that feeling in our heart, and then just once I'll slowly say the verse of refuge in Bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of generosity and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So studying, the first chapter of Shantideva. It's most really. I was thinking about this, reading it again. I've read it many times and studied it numerous times. And this thing, I was just like, for myself, I was feeling it's really like there's not a more beautiful book, poem. Uh, I can't think of one. And Son Dalai Lama often says this is, in his view, it's the best text on bodhicitta that exists, on the altruism that exists. Um, And we were up to verse we went last time I kind of covered through verse 23, but I'm just going to briefly go back over a few verses um, to remind us because with holidays it's been a little longer than usual. But so he was saying that in verse 15 he said Shantideva said that he was talking about so bodhicitta, right, this mind of altruistic altruism wishing to achieve enlightenment for the welfare of all beings. He says there are two types of it. One that, and he gives this analogy. He says it's like wishing to go somewhere and going somewhere. And he says, so one is a wish, right? The form of wish. So it's wishing, thinking, I would like to be able to achieve enlightenment. I'd like to be able to benefit all beings. And there it's in the form of a wish, which he says is amazing. What an amazing thing to achieve, right? Where one's feeling is that kind of love and compassion for all beings. And then he says, but then there's another version of it, which comes after the wish, which is they call it engaging bodhicitta. And that's where when it's like the first was like wanting to go somewhere, and the second is like starting the journey, right? So here, the engaging bodhicitta is where one starts doing the practices to achieve enlightenment. And so one has this wish in one's heart, and then one starts doing the things that create that lead to enlightenment. Um, and then he makes a point. He says both of these are amazing. Both of these both of these two forms of bodhicitta are remarkable. He says great fruits will arise from them. And then he says, but this engaging mind of bodhicitta, the one that's actually on the journey towards enlightenment, that's practicing the six perfections that he's going to explain in the text, he says, an uninterrupted flow of merit will not arise as like from the first. The first that kind of create is amazing, it's very meritorious. And then he says, but the second one, engaging bodhicitta, creates a kind of um, uninterrupted flow, right? Like a river. It's always kind of creating this beautiful causes, and of enlightenment. And then he says, I'll just read this. And then actually, so from he says that in verse 17, and then the next series of verses. So that's why I want to go back from verse 18 on for a long stretch here. He starts talking about the main topic of this chapter, which is the benefits of bodhicitta. And so why is he teaching that, right? And really, if you're trying to, and this text is mainly about bodhicitta, right? The bodhisattva's way of life. And so he starts with this because in cultivating bodhicitta, really the first step is to think about the benefits of think, why would I want to do that? And actually, this is normal human psychology, right? Like, in other words, if you want to, like, in other words, like if people, whatever we do, we think it's going to benefit us, right? We think it's going to benefit somebody at least, right? So if you say, oh, I want to get a job, well, why bother? Well, there's some benefit to that. Well, I want to go to school, why bother? I want to make a new friend, why bother? And you think, oh, there's some benefit. Then you decide, oh, I want to try that. I want to pursue that. So here he's saying you have to understand the benefits of bodhicitta to pursue it, right? Um, and so he's going to explain now the benefits of bodhicitta so that you develop a kind of enthusiasm and interest. And it's something that he'll say this later in the text. You know, the Buddhas teach, but I said this earlier in the commentary that the Buddhas themselves say there's nothing more beneficial in the universe and in all the universes than bodhicitta. But Shantideva is aware that for you know that I said right. Although the Buddhas say that for ordinary beings you don't even hear the word bodhicitta, right? Or ordinary. You know, I mean, even the word altruism. I remember actually, I wrote my I'm a psychologist. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on compassion. And at the time, there was only one book in English that was mainly focused on compassion. I think that's true. That was mainly focused on even compassion, and that's not Cheetah. Like nobody had studied it much. Now there's a lot more scientific study of compassion, and that really is because of the interaction with Buddhist teachers and scientists. So anyway, my point is that Shantideva is aware that people may not know the benefits, in other words, of bodhicitta because it's not in the worldly context. It's not commonly spoken about. Instead, people talk about benefits of other things. So he's going to explain it so that those who have an inclination in that direction, he said this at the beginning, right? He says, those who have a similar inclination to me, maybe they'll find some benefit in this. This is what I want to spend my time thinking about. Shantideva says, and he says that others with a similar disposition may find some benefit. So I'll share it. Kind of. And then he says, for one who has perfectly adopted this mind, meaning bodhicitta, with the thought never to turn away for the sake of totally liberating the infinite realms of sentient beings, right? So he's getting at what is that, right? This mind of bodhicitta, and it is a mind like that, right? That's where in one's heart, one is going around whatever else one is doing. Within one's heart is this feeling, right, of my wish is compassion for all beings, uh, all the infinite beings, right? And he says, from that time, now he's describing if you have this mind of engaging bodhicitta, right? Now he's talking about the benefits. He says, for somebody like that, from that time onwards, even while they're asleep or lacking conscientiousness, a force of merit equal to the sky will continually ensue. And so he's saying, like, even when you're passive, if that's what's in your heart, um, and actually, I think I'll share this personally. I remember this one time I was one of my actually reworks of this picture there. I was sitting with him in the living room in Fairfax, actually, at his niece's house. He came come here because he had cancer and was sick, and I was just sitting with him and drinking tea. And I was looking at him, and I knew he was somebody who had actualized bodhicitta. He had this what we're describing. And I remember having this feeling where I thought, wow, if I were sitting in like a stadium full of people who were all like cultivating love, it would be weaker than what I'm feeling with him just drinking a cup of tea. And so I'm getting at what Shantideva is saying here. It's like because his love is infinite, right? It's more than a whole stadium full, right? It's a love that's a lot of the compassion of bodhicitta that's infinite mind, right? Um, anyway, so point is that it's like more vaster than the sky. He's saying that kind of each moment is like that. It's because you have that kind of love, compassion, bodhicitta. And then he says, for the sake of those inclined to the lower, it is taught along with the. So then he's saying, I'm going to describe from the sutras here. Basically, he's saying there are sutras of the Buddha. So I'm going to quote. I'm now going to base this on what the Buddha taught about the benefits of bodhicitta. And then he said, there are a number of famous verses. Many of the verses in this text are famous, but he says here, if even the thought to relieve sentient beings of merely a headache possesses the attitude of possesses the attitude to benefit and possesses boundless merit, what need is there to mention the desire to dispel the boundless unhappiness of each sentient being and to accomplish boundless good qualities for every single one of them? So here he's getting at something. He's saying, and actually it's an interesting point, right? Like if you were with somebody and they had like a bad headache, and they said, "Do you have an Advil?" Right, or something, Aleve, or whatever, it's aspirin, and you like felt, oh wow, they're really you saw them like wince, and you felt, oh, they're really suffering. That's compassion. That is genuine compassion, right? And then you gave them some medicine. They might feel grateful to you. Like, oh wow, thank goodness they had something. And when I read this verse, I remember at that retreat. I went to one of those retreats, and sometimes I get a bad back, and I had a very bad back, and somebody had medication. I remember when I read this first, I remember I was so grateful because I was like, I didn't bring anything and I had this very bad back. And then they said from a long drive there. And I was like, oh, I'm so grateful to this person. They're getting at that, right? It's a kindness and it's a genuine compassion. And he's saying even that kind of genuine compassion possesses and it is a genuine attitude to benefit somebody and possesses boundless merit. It's a good thing, right? It's wonderful. And then he says, and then actually in the commentary they make a point. They raise a point of they raise like a number of points actually. They say so that's genuine compassion, and compassion in Tibetan the word for compassion is ning jay. Ning is heart, and jay is exalted. So they're saying of all the states of your heart, the most exalted. The word itself for compassion means it's the most exalted state of a heart of a human heart. Whatever sentient beings are, not just humans. But then Shantideva is getting at something here. He's saying, but that compassion is just a moment. And it's just for one being and for one suffering they have. And that's wonderful. And then he's saying, but bodhicitta is like that, but different than that. How is it different? First of all, it's aimed at infinite sentient beings, right? Not just one. Secondly, it's not just aimed at alleviating one of their sufferings, like a headache. It's aimed at alleviating their limitless sufferings. And actually, you know from your own life, right? That for a course of just one lifetime, there are many different kinds of suffering that can arise. And then if you look around the world, oh my goodness, right? It's like dizzying how many different sufferings. And bodhicitta is a wish to alleviate all of those. So just think of that heart, right? The heart like that. Then, not only that, but I mentioned this, right? The wish to alleviate the suffering of the headache is just momentary. It's like maybe it lasts a minute or two. Like, oh, let me check if I have something. And, you know, but bodhicitta is like a commitment um, for all eternity. If you take the bodhisattva vow, you're taking a vow from now until forever, as long as being suffered. The Dalai Lama's prayer that comes from this text, right? For as long as sentient beings remain, for as long as space endures, for as long as sentient beings remain, I too will remain to dispel the misery of the world. That's a line in this. That's one of the verses, and the Dalai Lama often quotes that one. Right. So it's an infinite. You're committing for, and like we differentiate that. We can see the difference between, say, somebody who just helped you with aspirin, right? And then let's say, for example, like you may have a family member, right, who says, "Well, until as long as I'm alive, I'll be there for you." Right? Well, that's a longer commitment, so it's a bigger deal, right? But a bodhisattva commits not just like, the bodhisattva's commitment is for all time, right? For infinite lifetimes. Until you're enlightened, the bodhisattva will be there, is their commitment, their wish. And then there's another infinite, which is the wish to achieve the infinite qualities of Buddhahood to benefit, to accomplish that well-being, right? So Shantideva is saying, so he's saying here, what need is there to mention the desire to dispel the boundless unhappiness of each and every sentient being and to accomplish boundless good qualities for each and every one of them? So he's saying, can you imagine such a heart, such a mind, right? Because we can understand the small compassion of a moment, but bodhicitta is taking that and enhancing it in your own heart until your feeling is. So you just meet anybody, right? And you feel, um, I wish to alleviate all their suffering, to lead them to every happiness. And however long that takes, um, there's nothing else I want to do but that. And if I can't help them much now, I'll help them more later, but whenever it's possible. That's my commitment. So he's saying, can you, he's trying to help us start to go, wow. Like, so in terms of the benefits, we used to go, oh my goodness, like, can I imagine that? How beautiful, how wonderful, how remarkable. And then and this is where the last verse I covered last time. So he says, who has such an altruistic intention as this? Do even fathers and mothers have it? Do the gods or the sages? Does even Brahma have it? And what he's getting at there is he's saying, he's acknowledging, first of all, mothers and fathers, on average, mostly, do really love their children and have compassion for them. But he's saying, actually, parents can't even imagine, right? Like, whereas they may, like, I was thinking of, think of parents, right? They want their kids to have a good job. They want their kids to have a good education because they love them, right? It's a good thing. But, if you were to most parents said, do you want your child to have infinite um, bliss eternally, I think they might think you're a little crazy, actually. Um, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. They would think that's a little odd question. Um, an infinite wisdom. You want your child to have infinite wisdom pervading the universe. I'm not sure. Maybe I don't know. It seemed like an odd question. So he's saying even a mother and father who love their child don't have that kind of wish for their child because they don't know. Right? They don't have the wisdom to understand that possibility. And then he says even gods and sages. And he's saying they're this guy when he says sages, they're like actually it says I'm sorry, Sanskrit for rishi, meaning like truth telling those who speak the truth. They're like meditators in India, like who would wander around. And he's saying, actually, it's true. Like I had a friend who spent time around some guys like that, some people like that, and he was saying, oh, they had these remarkable kind of abilities for meditation and things, but he said, oh, they weren't really loving actually. That wasn't their focus. He said, so he left. He was like, oh, that's not what I want to pursue. Uh, and then gods here is referring to like worldly gods. It's saying they may have some kind of supernatural ability or something. But it's saying, but if they don't have bodhicitta, that is not that. And then he says even Brahma. And the point there, in Hindu understanding, the way Brahma is like a god of a certain part of the universe, you could say. And the way you become Brahma is that you meditate on love for all beings in the universe or in that region. Like if you would meditate on, so it's actually they call them the Brahma Viharas, infinite love, infinite compassion. And the point here is that the Brahma Viharas are taught in Buddhism. They're in limitless states of love or compassion or equanimity or joy. But those aren't bodhicitta. Or so if you meditate on infinite love for all beings, for example, this is an amazing thing he's playing out. He's saying you could sit and meditate on an infinite love for all beings, but that's not the same as taking responsibility, feeling I will free them from suffering. I will do that work. I will become enlightened to do that. He's saying that's not the same thing, and so it doesn't have the same kind of commitment. It's not. It's that even that is not as high as Bodhi. He's going through like that state of infinite love is quite remarkable. He's saying, but it's not the same as bodhicitta, and you can see it actually if you meditate on infinite love. That's wonderful, and it's a actually that's considered a preliminary to bodhicitta though. Bodhicitta is because bodhicitta has a unique quality of first of all infinite compassion as well, but it's more than infinite compassion. There's what they call it this in Tibetan it's laksam, which is like the unusual attitude. It's this unusual attitude that is more than just compassion for all beings. It's they draw an analogy between to try to get the difference between infinite compassion and the state of um, unusual attitude. They sometimes give an analogy like actually I'll use a very mundane example like if you saw that somebody was ill, you might feel compassion, say, I want them to be well. But I'm thinking of like I'm thinking of my sister with her kids. If either of them are sick, she would do any like she'll get up at 4 in the morning and run out she'll go to any place, she'll go, she'll do anything. It doesn't matter if it's 2 in the morning, if it's whatever, she'll go anywhere, she'll do anything, she'll spend any amount of money, it doesn't matter, even if they're a little sick, she it's a different level of commitment. So the Loxam is that for all beings. So it's like that. That's the best analogy I can give for that. It's a shift from compassion to a different kind of compassion. Um,
Is it like not just having compassion for their suffering, but like taking almost like a personal responsibility for alleviating that suffering?
yep, that's right. That's exactly it. And then that leads, and just psychologically, what happens is you take responsibility for that suffering, and then Shantideva, there's a verse in here later, it'll come where he says, then you look and you say, now I feel this responsibility like that, but I can't even alleviate my own suffering. And then that's when you generate the wish to become a Buddha. It's a sequence. Like you generate that feeling of I feel this responsibility to liberate all beings. Then you look and you say, no, I'm not even able to stop my own self from. And then you develop this wish to achieve Buddhahood, and that's the moment of bodhicitta, actually. That is what bodhicitta, that's the moment where you generate bodhicitta. So it's based on that responsibility. So now so then Shantideva in verse 24 says something. He says, if those who have not even dreamt before of such an attitude for their own welfare in their dreams, how can they generate for the welfare of others? Right. So he's making a couple of points here. One is an explicit point, but then there's also an implicit thing. This word contemplating. The explicit point is he's saying is, you know, these other people, right? These other examples I gave, like a parent or a rishi or whoever, if they can't imagine um, full enlightenment, even for themselves, how can they wish to give it to somebody else, right? Um, that's what he's explicitly saying, which is valid, right? In other words, that you can't, but then there's an implication there, isn't there? Which is worth contemplating here, which is, you know, first if you're looking at somebody else, you can say, well, if they can't imagine that for themselves, how can they wish it for somebody else, right? So they don't have this bodhicitta. But it also implies that if we want to generate bodhicitta, first we have to generate an understanding of our own suffering, right, of its causes, and generate a wish for ourselves to be completely free of suffering, right? And if you can, and what he's saying is, if you can't even imagine a state where you're completely and totally free from suffering, then saying you wish that for others is a bit phony, I guess, isn't it? And so the idea here is that you generate and actually in famous text by Lama Tsongkhapa called the three principal aspects of the path, in which he goes sequentially, and there's a sequence. He's teaching how do you generate the three are it's what's called definite emergence, which is this wish to give yourself complete liberation, then bodhicitta, and then wisdom, understanding, emptiness. And and in that text, Lama Tsongkhapa makes the same point Shantideva is here saying, but he's basically saying if you can't generate that wish for yourself, you don't understand the suffering of others. You don't understand that they can be free from it. Once you understand that your own suffering, if you look at inside your own being and you understand, wow, my own suffering is developed by causes, and those causes can be eliminated, right? Then you understand, oh, others also want to be happy, and they also have those same kinds of causes in them, so they can be liberated from them also, right? And then you understand, and what would that be like, right, for them? And that's all prerequisites to developing bodhicitta. If you don't have that understanding, because then even if you develop compassion, or let's say love or compassion, um, you'll just wish for beings whatever your best understanding is at that moment of what happiness and well-being are. And actually, sometimes our understanding is actually makes things worse. If we're not careful, if our understanding isn't very deep, actually we can think, oh, I want to make everybody happy, so I'll do this, and then actually make their lives worse. That's easy to do. So he's getting at a point here, right? Which is you have to understand suffering, its causes, happiness, its causes, and then those are prerequisites to really developing bodhicitta. Um, and then he says, such a mind of welfare, such a mind of welfare for sentient beings or of sentient beings does not arise even for their own sake, right? So here he's saying he's actually getting at something very deep, right? Which is like, beings don't even understand for themselves what would be the ultimate well-being, right? Their ultimate freedom from suffering. They can't even imagine that. And he says, an outstanding jewel of the mind, an unprecedented wonder is born. He's saying what he's getting at here is like, how amazing is that, right? That you're wishing for something, it's like again, I'm just using an analogy here, but like, what's the if you think of actually just for a moment here, think of somebody you feel compassion for or love for in your normal life. And then ask yourself, actually, what's the happiness I wish for them? And is there some higher, is there some more exalted? Is there some more wonderful state I could wish for them? Is there something even more liberating, something even more freeing, something even more delightful, something even more blissful that I could wish for them. And and this is what a bodhisattva actually, where he says here, such a mind of welfare of sentient beings does not arise even for their own sake. Part of what he's getting at is like, and this would be what it'd be like to be with the bodhisattva, right? They see potential in you don't see in yourself. They see potential in whoever they meet that they may not see in themselves. Um, because in everybody they see the potential for infinite good things. Um, and so, that's he's describing. Wow, like that's what the mind, that they wish for others what others can't even imagine yet is possible for themselves because they don't have enough self-esteem, enough self-confidence, enough recognition of their potential.
I was just thinking, I never thought about karma too much. Like, is there a point where we talk about karma? Because, like, I was thinking when you were talking about the unusual mind, that it's like just doing for others or selflessly giving. And I was thinking, I'm not that way. If a friend calls me at 4 a.m., like, I have a lot of boundaries, but I feel that I have a lot of bodhicitta. But what about the interplay between wanting for others, but then there is the reality of karma? Like we each have to live within and accept the consequences and be responsible for our own karma. So even if I had bodhicitta and wish for others free, can I free them from that? Because like my understanding of what I've seen is for each of us, kind of like our karma has to burn off. I don't know if I'm saying that the right way before we can be free from that. So if you see someone suffering and you wish for them, but do you have that power to take away or release them from the consequences of their own past actions or well?
That's a great question. So she was asking about karma, karma as it relates to bodhicitta and the limitations of our ability to benefit others depending upon their karma. And I'll say two different points here. Like, I want to make, say a couple different points. First of all, so when I was saying in relation to one's own karma and then in relation to others' karma. So I'm saying just because I think you were mostly asking about others' karma, but I'll say reasons both. So remember, one thing I want to say first is like karma is mainly determined by the motivation of the mind, right? I mean, there's like the main thing that determines whether karma. I mean, there's certain actions that tend to be that karma, but the main factor is one's mind. So like, and so they often get those that way. If somebody builds a wing to a hospital mainly for self-promotion of their company, that's not actually good karma, particularly if they're not doing it out of kindness, and so on, whatever. Um, but one point I'll make for oneself here first is that and Shantideva is actually saying this here, is if you do something with bodhicitta as your motivation, then the karma of that is infinitely good, and that's where he says like it was in the earlier section actually where he talked about like there are other virtues that are like I said he says a plantain tree or like a annual something that blossoms once and then dies. Then he says, but bodhicitta is like a perennial tree, like a tree that gives fruit every year, but it forever. So he's making a point that the karma of bodhicitta is such for yourself that it never ends actually because it leads to Buddhahood, and then Buddhahood itself becomes an infinite giving and benefit to others. So one point is for yourself, whatever you do with bodhicitta is an infinitely karmically beneficial action. But that wasn't really your question. Your question was more about the other person. And and yeah, I mean to direct it, they say that even the Buddha themselves, even so not a bodhisattva is true, but even for a Buddha, they say, the Buddha can't take away someone's karma by touching them or by washing them or by, they can't zap you take away your karma. If they could, nobody would suffer already. Um, and so this Dalai Lama often points out, he says, don't expect, I saw that movie Frank, that you were recommending, the one with, and he says that, right? He says, "Don't expect too much." That's very funny. He starts because he can't do something. He's like, I think he's making the point that nobody can take away. Or is there? Um, but and Shantideva will explain this. What he points out is so on a there are two different. I guess there are a couple different things. One is the Bodhisattva does help where they can by giving somebody medicine or giving somebody, building a bridge. I mean, there are examples in this text, building a bridge or building a school or building, there are ways that bodhisattvas directly try to help. But your point about karma is interesting, right? Because the bodhisattva can't take away somebody else's karma and can't, but they can. And actually, if you study the bodhisattva vows, they're quite beautiful in this way. Because if you try to practice them, it becomes quite interesting in a way. Because I'll give one example. I'm just thinking of one example, but there are countless examples like this for many, not countless. There are many examples like this, where it says, you know, I always find this funny. Like, I'm going to say very the precepts of, or I don't know, the sort of behavioral demands of ordinary life and behavioral demands of a bodhisattva are different. But one bodhisattva vow is if you see somebody doing something good that's genuinely good, and you don't encourage them, you're breaking an auxiliary vow. Because it's like beings are so trapped in their karma, right? That it's rare for anybody to do genuinely good karma. Like it's easy to do bad karma, and it's um, relatively rare, let's say. So like an example of what he's talking about is you're helping people. So the idea here is that by encouraging them, they'll maybe do that more, right? Say, oh, that's so wonderful, and oh, can I help you? And because you're doing something wonderful, and then maybe they do it longer, and then they're creating more good karma, right? And then that creates also a karmic connection with you for them to, and so on. Or so and that's not giving somebody some formal teaching or being some kind of famous whatever. It's just encouraging goodness, right? Um, so part of the process that a bodhisattva does is because they see the infinite potential for good in others, they help them change their own karma, right? And that might be, like we're helping them, like, some at the moment where it's possible, and it's not always possible, helping somebody let go of their resentment, right, about something, because that is changing their karma. Or engaging with somebody in some practice or other, or whatever that, it could be a formal Buddhist practice, or has nothing to do with Buddhism, but it's something, that's beneficial. So I think to answer your question directly, really you can't change somebody else's karma, but by yourself, but you can participate interdependently with them and helping them change their karma. Does that kind of address what you were getting at? Um, Actually, other comments or questions? Pause there. Yeah.
I was making that was a great question. So, what did you think of Milarepa? And he did some really bad stuff. But somehow or another, something zapped him and made a lot of his bad karma not have to ripe it or something like that because he became a Buddha in one lifetime. So, because it sounds like from the answer, like somebody would have to be on the verge of Buddhahood before they Bodhisattva could help them. But how did Milarepa get rid of all of his bad karma?
She asked about the life. She was asking about Milarepa, if you couldn't hear, like who did very bad things in that lifetime. Um, Actually, it's interesting if you look at if you look at his um, biography, his the life story of Milarepa. It's a very touching story, uh, beautiful, beautiful story. He had well. First of all, he had this like actually, it was an interesting thing, right? In his life story, there's a point where, first of all, he takes the first step in his karma, right? Because he kills people, and then he develops regret and actually and fear about the karma, right? He thinks I did something terrible, and if I die like this, I'll just go to hell and whatever. I'll be, this is terrible. I did something bad. He regrets it because he caused suffering. And then actually, the first step is he goes and he goes to try to find a spiritual teacher, right? And he meets this teacher who says, "Oh, enlightenment's, I think the teacher might be teaching Dzogchen or something, and the teacher says, you know, oh, you can rest and relax, and you'll sort of meditate on the nature of mind, and you can be liberated. And Milarepa's been so afraid he hasn't slept, so when he meets the teacher says that, and he goes to meditate, and he falls asleep because he's tired from having been so worried. And then the teacher realizes, I'm not the right teacher for you. This isn't going to work. Um, and the teacher's recognizing in Milarepa, you have all this bad karma, and this is not the teacher that the practice that teacher had. Well, it may have been a very valid teaching, wasn't the right teaching for him. And he says, go look for Marpa. I think he's a better fit. But then if you look at the life story, his life story with Marpa, right? His bad karma kind of does ripen, but Marpa helps it ripen. Marpa was a very unusual kind of teacher, right? Who says, well, if you want these teachings, Milarepa shows up and says, I don't have any money, but will you teach me? That was Marpa purifying. Yeah, so Marpa was like, oh, he needs to purify his karma, and so Milarepa at that point is devoted to the teachings, right? So he has good motivation. He thinks, I want to achieve enlightenment. I want to purify my karma. I want to progress on the path. So at that point, his motivation is good. And then Marpa gives him a hard time, right? Throws him out of the teachings and tells him to, and he says, like, everybody else is welcome, but Milarepa's not. And then he says, oh, build another tower. And then Milarepa has sores on his back from building a tower. And he says, no, take that one down. But that's like a very unique relationship between Marpa and Milarepa of Marpa seeing he once he purifies that karma by doing all this, and there comes a point, right, when Marpa says, no. Actually, first his wife gives him some helps Milarepa, and then Marpa says, oh, he needed a little more difficulty. You helped him too. She had a lot of compassion, so she couldn't bear seeing Milarepa. At a certain point, she let him suffer for quite a while. She trusted Marpa, but then there came a point where she didn't really trust her husband, and she let him help. But Marpa says he would, but there's an interesting moment in their life story where it looks like Marpa's being very mean, actually, and then you start to see, oh, Marpa actually has unbearable love for Milarepa. He feels Milarepa's like his own child, and he says, but he needs, because he did so much, because he was a murderer essentially and did other bad things. He needs a difficult path. And then there comes a point where Milarepa is done with all that, and then he gives him the teachings, and he goes off, and that's then he practices with great energy, which he still doesn't. It's not like he becomes enlightened like that, right? He practices in retreat for years and years, so he purifies it through his own hardships in a way. So yeah, you can't even he couldn't escape his karma, but he purified it through effort and through his relationship with Marpa in that case, who was a very skillful teacher for him, who gave him a hard time out of kindness.
Yes, thank you.
So then, Shantideva says, how can I fathom the merits, right? Here's getting a karma, right? Of this jewel or precious mind, right? And here, mind is sem, so it's, I just want to say this in Tibetan or Chitta in Sanskrit. And it is mind, I mean, it's good translation, mind, but it also means heart. It's the same, there's not, I think in English, I always hesitate a little because we have this whole tradition in Europe and America of like the mind versus the heart. There are a lot of poems like that, or written, Thomas Jefferson wrote an essay, right, or a letter, debate between my mind and my heart, or something. So we kind of differentiate those as if they're two separate things, but Chitta encompasses both. So it's not separate. So anyway, this jewel-like mind, heart, the cause of joy of all migrating beings, the panacea for the sufferings of sentient beings. So there are a number of points I think worth making here. So one is he says, how can I fathom the benefits, right? They're so vast. And then it's like a jewel, right? Meaning it's precious. It's something remarkable. It's something valuable that alleviates suffering. And a jewel is a common metaphor in Buddhism in the sense that, you can say like a jewel, if you find a jewel, it alleviates your suffering of poverty. And in a similar way, if you find the jewel of bodhicitta, it alleviates your suffering of being a samsaric being. Then he says, the cause of joy of all migrating beings. So there, first of all, migrating beings is it's a common term in Buddhism. And what that means, actually, it's funny now. I mean, um, there's that term now, is it migrants or something that people are using? But anyway, we're all according to Buddhism, we're all migrating beings. And migrating in this context means we actually to say it is that we're driven by karma and mental afflictions, and we go from life to life without any refuge or home in a sense. Our we don't have control. I mean, even in this life, we don't have control over what's going to happen to us, and we certainly don't have control over our past, our future lives. Unless you're of generating bodhicitta, then there comes a point where you do develop that ability. But for most of us, ordinary beings, we're migrating beings. We don't have any control, and we're thrown here and there, and we wander without control, without wisdom. And he's saying, and Shantideva uses that term. He's saying we're all like that, right? Until we're at a certain level of the path. And he's saying, so for being like that, what helps us, right? We ourselves and others. And then he's saying it's bodhicitta. That's the cause of joy for beings like that. And there are a couple points for this line, the cause of joy for all migrating beings. It's kind of funny, right? You're generating bodhicitta to wish to benefit others. But the first person who benefits from your bodhicitta is you, of course, right? Because once you generate bodhicitta, um, you begin creating that kind of good karma, right? Infinite good karma with each action. And then also this is engaged bodhicitta, right? And so I want to elaborate, and it says the panacea for the suffering of sentient beings. And Gyaltsab Je in his commentary says this is referring specifically, mainly to engaged bodhicitta. And so I want to elaborate a little bit. And I'm elaborating just a little bit on really this is for yourself first, but then it later will also help you help others. Does that make sense? But when you have engaged bodhicitta, right, you have this wish, but you begin practicing the six perfections. And we're going to cover a lot about the six perfections and chapters on them in this text, but briefly here, um, the commentary said, through bodhicitta, you achieve what they call high status and definite goodness. And those are terms from text by Nagarjuna. So high status means it's like if you want to help others, right, you have to, um, well, for one thing, actually, you have to have decent rebirths where you are capable of helping anybody. And so the commentaries make this point. They say of the six perfections, the second one is the perfection of ethics. And so it means you practice ethics with this wish to benefit others, right? And most of ethics, according to the way it's defined in Buddhism, is not harming anybody, yourself or others. Right? But ethical training is mainly the cause of good rebirths. Doing unethical things creates bad karma that leads to bad rebirths. Following, so through your ethics, you create the causes of having a series of good rebirths that allow you then to help others, and help yourself and progress on the path. And then they say of the six perfections, generosity means that when you have this good rebirth, you'll have the resources to be able to practice the path and work for the welfare of others. And then patience, they say, is one of the main karmic results of patience is having good companions, right? Because you're kind to others and treat others with respect and treat others with kindness. So the karmic result of that is others treat you with kindness, and you develop good relations with others. That happens in this life. If you notice, if you watch and they say that just elaborates more and more over lifetimes. Um, so through those three perfections, practicing those in this life and then in the next life, you develop kind of a momentum of having rebirths where you have the right kind of body to practice the path and help others, the right kind of resources, where you can afford to go and study somewhere or something, and then companions who are willing to help you in your efforts to practice and help others. And then they say joyous effort is the next another perfections. They say that helps with both if you have joyful effort, it helps you practice ethics, generosity, and patience. And it also helps with the last two perfections. So generosity helps with all of the above. But then the last two perfections are concentration and wisdom. And those lead to definite goodness, meaning enlightenment itself. They lead directly to kind of the enlightened state. So you need all six perfections to progress on the path, is part of the point here. So it's saying it's the cause. So, if you generate this kind of bodhicitta, it causes you to be happy immediately. It causes you to be happy in future lives. It causes you to be happy, and then also it causes you to be able to help others. And then you help others, as you were getting at, you become, and actually they say that in the teachings on the Bodhisattva path, that each time you make progress on your own path, you become more capable of helping others because you have more wisdom to understand how to help others, right? And yeah, so then, and that way it becomes a panacea for the welfare of all sentient beings. And you become a Buddha, you become, actually, I remember, let me say this every one time, one was Open was saying, he was saying, even when you want to help others, if you haven't even entered the path, of course, you make tons of mistakes. When you want to help somebody, maybe you make it worse, actually. And then he was saying, as you like, he was giving examples. He says there are different paths and grounds, right? The 5 paths and the 10 grounds. And he was getting like a bodhisattva. He went through this whole thing where he said the bodhisattva on the final ground, right before Buddhahood, has this like ability to send out emanations and to see past and future lives and to see where beings' karma is. And he says, but they still make mistakes compared to a Buddha. He said they're not. They don't. Sometimes they don't know just the right second. Or if they were to do something, it might shift something for me. They can't see everything that a Buddha can see. They just then the person on the next moving down, they make more mistakes, and then he goes down. And then he went down all, it was funny. He went down like, he says, the eighth movie, the seventh movie, the sixth movie, the fifth movie, the fourth, the third, so on the first. And they said that before the first movie, there's the path of preparation, and there are 4 levels of that. Then there's the path of accumulation. And he said, so then he said, so then if you're like not yet on the path of accumulation, of course you're going to make a lot of mistakes, but you have to try. That was his point. You have to try to help others, right? But then you'll get better and you'll become more skillful at it as you progress. And the idea here is, I'm just getting at all that. That's the panacea for beings, right? If you practice bodhicitta and the 6 perfections, you become more capable of helping. And then he says something, yeah, interesting here. He says, if a merely beneficial intention excels venerating the Buddhas, then what need to mention striving to make all beings without exception happy? And that's worth mentioning something about. There's a famous, there's a number of famous quotes. One is from the King of Concentration Sutra, the Samadhi Raja Sutra, King of Concentration in English, Sutra, where it says, he basically says in the sutra, in that sutra, which is teaching the Buddha says, basically, if you were to constantly every day worship the Buddhas and make countless offerings to them of all different kinds of beautiful things, even the things that can be found on this earth, and even the things that can only be found in Buddha realm, if you were somehow able to travel to the pure lands of the Buddhas and offer. If you travel to 100 million Buddha fields and you found all the most precious, beautiful objects, and you offer to the Buddhas every day, all day, that's nothing compared to the benefit of love. He says that's a much better offering to the Buddhas. And then, so Huma Khyentse he said that. He said he elaborated on it. He said all the Buddhas care. Buddha actually says the Buddhas don't care about stuff. They don't want anything. He said all the Buddhas want is to help others. And he said, so what better offering could there be to the Buddhas than if you help others? That's what the Buddhas actually want, right? Is for others to be free from suffering. And if you have some connection to somebody and you're able to help them, then that's the best way to please the Buddhas. So he said, so if you want to make offerings to the Buddha, the best offering is to treat others kindly, to offer love and compassion to others. And then I said this earlier about for one's own karma. It said if the merits of this is from a different sutra, but it says if the merits of bodhicitta were to be put into form, the universe wouldn't be big enough to hold that form. And all it's getting at really is that what we said earlier, right? That because the bodhicitta is infinite, it's aimed at infinite beings, it's aimed at the infinite suffering of infinite beings, and so on. So here he's saying the best way to honor the Buddhas or something is to help is helping others. Um, so that's another benefit, right? He's saying what are the benefits of Buddhism? If you want, if you feel some devotion to the Buddhas or you feel like you're a Buddhist, then the best offering you make to the Buddhas is that help others. And then he says, this is a verse that I've thought about, not every day, but many times, hundreds of thousands of times in my life. Although wishing to be rid of misery, they run towards misery itself. Although wishing to have happiness like an enemy, they ignorantly destroy it. And I just think that that's a verse, oh my gosh, you could, I mean, if you think about if you think about yourself, if you think about the news, if you think about what's happening in almost any part of the planet, right? And these are and I'm just giving human beings an example, right? Like, of course, human beings have more intelligence than some other things, although we don't. And Dalai says, what did he say? He said this brain, and he said like he said if you use it the wrong way, it's quite an effective troublemaker, isn't it? Like, anyway, and part of the point here, right, is when they give commentary on this verse 28, that one I just read, is at one point a number of commentators say it's like watching a moth fly into a flame, watching ordinary ourselves and others, right? That we, the moth thinks the flame is going to somehow be pleasurable, and then it burns itself, right? And then the commentators go on and they say, and this is what I was getting at earlier when we did the meditation, but the commentators about this verse say, um, you know, we all, or this referring to ordinary people, right? And ordinary people means all of us, all people, um, whatever, all ordinary people. Um, that the way we approach life is, first of all, grounded in ignorance, grasping in itself. That an inherently there is a self, but an inherently existent self, an independent self. That as if the self exists independently, which it doesn't. And based on that ignorance, we give rise to all different kinds of conceptual elaborations and mental afflictions. Right? And part of the point here they get at in Buddhist teachings is once you have that grasping, as if there's a independent self where there is no independent self, then you grasp at other. Right? You say, well, this is self, so that's other. And then based on that, they make a point. They say then any kind of concept is possible, no matter how distorted or ridiculous it is, because it's grounded in a distortion. Right? Once you start with a distortion or ignorance, something is incorrect, then you can give rise to infinite kinds of incorrect concepts. And then based on those limitless incorrect concepts, we all give rise to mental afflictions, hatred, craving, pride, jealousy, and so on, all the different limitless versions of those too. Um, and then in that way, right, although so this is that point about we think we want to be, we do want to be happy, right? But then based on these distorted concepts, right, although we wish to be rid of misery, we run towards misery, right? And um, one point is just reading that verse is a good meditation for compassion, isn't it? And a few other points I want to make, though. Another one is, the first job of oneself, of course, is to recognize how do I do that, and to try to stop, you know. And it's not easy, is it? Because when you're caught up in a mental affliction, it really feels like this is what will make me happy. This will solve my problem, and that can help us then empathize with others. You can write like, if you've studied Buddhism a fair bit, right? You can go, oh my gosh, I've studied this stuff. Like, I know most people never even heard the idea that um, that there's this cognitive distortion underlying anger that leads you to create suffering for yourself, right? I know that, and then if I get angry, it's hard to not think, well, if I could just whatever, if I could just get this, if I could just say this, then it'll be better. So you think, oh my gosh, first of all, if you meditate on this, you can recognize, wow, I've got to change that for myself, or I'm going to keep being miserable, right? That's the first point. You see, earlier I was saying you have to understand for yourself to understand for others, right? Where he said, if you don't dream of it for yourself, and then if you develop empathy for others, you think, well, of course it's hard for others. Like nobody even ever told them that. And then just telling somebody that doesn't really do anything. They have to think about it, and they have to have time and space to think about it, and they have to want to think about it. And so if you contemplate that verse, it can give rise to a kind of unbearable passion, really, can't it? Where you feel all that matters is to free ourselves and others from that kind of insanity. Um, and oh yeah, and so and part of the point here is that Shantideva was saying so. In that circumstance, it's bodhicitta that helps, right? What stops that process for myself and then for others that is bodhicitta. That's what bodhicitta does, right? It helps us stop doing that, stop running towards the causes of suffering and destroying our own happiness, and then it helps us help others do that. And you have to do it for yourself before if you're not, if you can't um, help others be free from that if you're not freeing yourself from it. And it's a matter of degree. It's like if you get that, that's what I was saying earlier, right? If you get this much better at freeing yourself from it, you're that much more skillful at helping others and so on. It's a process.
It just sounds to me like I'm just thinking of like metaphors, I guess, and it sounds to me like watching like a loved one destroy themselves with addiction. And I mean, if you're addicted to, you probably can't help because you got to help yourself first before you can help them. But like your motivation obviously can be there, and the great compassion you can feel for somebody watching somebody you love, who wants to get better but can't seem to do it. And what would you do in that situation? Hopefully you would learn how to help them. You try to, you'd feel helpless at first. Well, how can I help these people? How can I help this person I love? And you would learn. And this, this takes out from the small scale of an addiction to the whole large scale of samsaric suffering, right? And so bodhisattva, how can I help? That's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and one point, I'm going to go back to your question about karma. I was just sharing, I was just contemplating what you just said made me think of something, which is, one of the qualities of a Buddha is that, which is different than a Bodhisattva, of course, it's the result of the Bodhisattva, right? Is like, Buddhas, you know, create, they call them Buddha fields, right? Pure lands or something. But in a way, you could say they create whole cultures, whole worlds, whole contexts that help beings change their karma, right? So that but then it's tricky, isn't it? Because how do they create those? They can't just create them like this. They actually have to guide those beings to be ready to experience those. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I was like, oh, because if you gave a being, I was like thinking, I was like, wow, like you wish that you could give a being a pure land. Right? But actually, if you don't help the being be ready, then of course they turn a pure land into a hell. Uh, because if all the being has is hatred, then it's not a pure land for them, right? They would, you could have people coming to them and saying, "Please let me help you," and they would say, "Get away from me! You're trying to kill me." It's like you have to help the beings be ready for that, and so it's a long process, And if you look at the process of what Buddhas do, it's like they do that over lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. If you look at the sutras, I'm talking about the Buddha, right? He said, he'll say like, "Oh, these five people, the five monks who achieved the light." There's like five. They weren't. I guess they became monks, but they were the first five disciples who were his friends, right? They were all meditating together, and then he became the Buddha, and then they were the first five who he studied with. But then if you look in the sutras, right, he said those were the five cubs of the tigress many, many lifetimes before he had fed his body when they were, the tigress was dying and he felt unbearable compassion for the tigress and those five cubs. And he said prayers for them and he meditated for them and he developed love for them and he gave them his body. And he said, in the future, I'll give you the Dharma. Right? And then they became something else and he taught them something else. And then they became something else. And so finally, when he was ready to become a Buddha, they were ready to become arhats. But he had done that from life to life to life, leading them, helping them, guiding them. helping them change their karma, maybe is the right way to say it. And there are many stories like that if you look in the Buddhist sutras, because it's a slow process, isn't it? Which I think gets at something, which is there's no quick, easy way to help people or animals or beings. And then the next verse says, "For those who are deprived of happiness and burdened with many sorrows, it satisfies them with all joys and dispels all their sufferings." Um, and another point here I'll just make, which is what's getting at here, is it is getting at karma here. I mean, one is, because bodhicitta doesn't do that magically, right? It's that bodhicitta, especially engaged bodhicitta, teaches one what to take up and what to abandon, right? What to do and what not to do. And even for ourselves, right? I mean, this has become, again, the main point, bodhisattvas are doing that for others, but I just want to remind us, remind myself, I guess. I was thinking about that this week because actually, John, I was thinking of you, your questions about emptiness. I was thinking about emptiness one day, and I thought of something you had asked, and then I was thinking about something which is, if somebody's sort of in a meditative equipoise on emptiness, then they're in meditative equipoise on emptiness. That's a meditation. But then I was like, as soon as you're not in that, what's worth doing? And it's bodhicitta, isn't it? Like there's nothing else, you know, it's love, it's compassion, it's the wish to achieve enlightenment for all beings. And then naturally that tells you, well, what should you do and what should you not do, right? I should be generous, or I should be ethical, or I should be patient, or I should be, that's what I want to do is the thought, because that's what's helpful. And and part of the implication here is that you doing that helps others in the long run also. Even if you're just being patient in your own heart and nobody knows it yet, you're helping others humongously. That's what, and I used to think that was like the Dalai Lama would say, right? He would say, your best contribution to world peace is to be less angry and less hateful and more patient yourself. And because you're a part of the world for one thing, right? But how can you help other people or planet or beings be less hateful if you're still hateful yourself, right? You have to overcome that in yourself, and then you can help somebody else, hopefully, and so on. And then he says, oh, what's that? Then he says, he's talking still about bodhicitta. He says, it clears away confusion. Where is there a comparable virtue? Where is there even such a friend? Where is there merit similar to this? Um, and so a number of points here. One is that it clears away confusion, right? It clears away the confusion about what to do and what not to do, right? And oftentimes we are confused, aren't we? Like it's hard to know what's best. And I remember it was on this topic. Lama Zobrumshe once was saying that. He said, if you're confused about what to do, you know, he didn't use all these words, but he said, he basically was saying, look at your own capacity, look at who you are, and then ask, well, what's going to help? What's going to help to me to make the most progress on the path in order to help others the most? The most. That's the right answer. And it depends on where you're at. It's up to you. What's your capacity? What's your interest? What's your ability? What's your personality? But that's always the right answer, right? Is like, what's going to help you progress on the path and help others the most? Whatever that answer is, that's the best thing to do. Where is there a comparable virtue? There is, he's saying there's no virtue better than this. Right? Compassion itself is the best state of your heart, but this is the most exalted form of compassion. And he says, where is there even such a friend? And this one is really interesting, isn't it? Because like we're migrating beings. I was saying that earlier, right? And I think I've shared this before, but I'll just say, like, the bodhicitta, if you cultivate it, right, if you develop it, like the part of the word they're getting at here is like, we can have other friends. That's good. It's good to have friends. Um, but the truth is that um, there is no other friend who's completely reliable. Because one thing, anybody can die any second, right? Whereas there's no guarantee that any other friend will be there. And certainly when you die, you know, you go on, you can't take your friends with you, and you don't want to actually take your friends. Uh, you want them to live long or whatever, but bodhicitta is the friend that will never abandon you. If you have bodhicitta, and in that movie that Dalai Lama, I think it was Richard Gere said this point, but he said that when Dalai Lama left Tibet, he looked around India and he said, "I don't know anybody here, right? I don't have any friends here." And they said, then very quickly everybody became friends with Nehru, who was the prime minister, and then he said later, "Now I have friends everywhere on the planet." That's what bodhicitta does. I mean, like I actually was teased. I joked. I was kind of my guru, actually, Gyume Khyentse Rinpoche. I kind of teased him because I said, like, he's a monk and he lived in poverty his whole life intentionally. He's a monk. He just wanted to meditate. He studied. He taught, and then but he has the Bodhisattva, and I was teasing with it because I said, "Oh, it's funny. You never like you're a monk, but people keep offering him houses and places to live. He was like in America, like people love him because he's a bodhisattva. So people meet him and they think, oh, he's the most delightful person. Can I, please take this house, please? And I was like saying, most people they work and selfishly, they work for themselves. They think I want to make more money, and then they like work really hard. They try to save up money, and maybe they can buy like a house, and then they're worried about the house and paying it off. And I said, you never work, and then you have all these houses. And he said, I don't want any houses. I don't care about that. Or he was like, I don't care about any of that. Which is true, doesn't care about it. But I was sort of joking. I was saying like, everything comes to you through bodhicitta, and he was like, kind of waving me like saying, go away or something. But bodhicitta takes care of. That's the point here. Bodhicitta is a friend that wherever you go, right? In other words, that my point is, like, he came to America, he didn't know anybody, but he has all these people who are like, oh, can you please accept this card, accept this? I'm not sure. You don't practice bodhicitta for that reason. Obviously, that's not my point. But the point is, wherever you go, you have friends if you have bodhicitta, because bodhicitta is your friend. Um, and then where is there a merit similar to this? It's the best way to create good karma. And that ends a section where he's talking about the benefits of bodhicitta itself, of engaged bodhicitta. And then from verse 31 on, he shifts to praising the greatness of bodhisattvas. So it's similar, right? It's bodhicitta, but here he just shifts his focus slightly. There he's praising the mind of bodhicitta. Then he starts to praise bodhisattvas. Maybe I'll do the first of those verses now if I stop. Question. But he says, uh, if whoever reciprocates benefit is worthy of some praise, then what need to mention the bodhisattva? So he's talking about the bodhisattva, right? Who does good without it being asked, right? And so what he's getting at there is like ordinarily, um, if somebody repays the kindness of others, you say, oh, that's a good thing, which it is. And he's saying that's correct, it is a good thing. And then he's saying a bodhisattva is different, right? In other words, they are they help others who don't help them, and they help others who harm them, right? And there's a just think about this morning. There's a famous, I guess it's a previous life of the Buddha, but there's a story in the Lotus Sutra of the Bodhisattva never disparaging. I was about think about that in this one because that Bodhisattva, his main practice in that lifetime was respect. That he would never, he viewed everyone as a future Buddha. So whatever somebody did, he just thought, this is somebody who's going to be a Buddha someday, and he would kind of treat them with great respect. And they say that some other people were critical of him because they thought, oh, he doesn't like, he's not a good scholar and he's not doing a lot of recitations of sutras. He was supposed to be, he was monk, but he wasn't doing sort of kind of like Shantideva, I guess. And so some of the other monks, I guess, or nuns, or I guess monks, right, were criticizing him. And then they say he was just like, oh, you're a future Buddha. So even the people who were criticizing him, he kept thinking, oh, you're a future Buddha. And then they like kind of tried to throw him out, and he kept the perspective. Okay, that's what a right? Bodhisattvas, whether you, the point here is this, he's getting at something, Shantideva is making a point here, which is bodhisattvas, whether you help them or you're neutral to them or you're trying to harm them, they're trying to help you. Right? And if you, to the extent that we're trying to be bodhisattvas, then we do like that. However others treat us, the motivation, the wish is to help them. And you recognize, right, that when they're harming you, it's like what with that verse above, right? Although, although not wanting misery, they're creating the cause of misery. That's the idea. That's the practice of the Bodhisattva, or part of the practice of the Bodhisattva. So he's describing, right, these qualities. Now, in the next section, he'll describe more about the qualities of bodhisattvas. And I'll conclude just by saying, so Shantideva said at the beginning, right, like he was composing these verses mainly to remind himself, like he said, which is this poem about, to train his own mind. And then he said, but if somebody else has a similar interest, then great, you can also. So if we have a similar interest, then we can think, oh wow, I want to think like that. And even a moment, right, of thinking. This is Shantideva's also made a point here, which is even a moment of just thinking about the benefits of bodhicitta, the beauty of bodhicitta, the wonder of bodhicitta, trying to cultivate, and even if we don't, he's getting at like what they call engaged bodhicitta. It means you've realized bodhicitta. You're actually, which means it's your baseline, right? Like when in your dreams, in your sleep, when you wake up, it's how you relate to life in each moment. It's your kind of, it's your normal baseline. Like it's the way when ordinary people wake up and they think, oh, what am I going to have for breakfast, or what do I need to do today? The bodhisattva, when they wake up, they think, oh, how can I help? How can I achieve enlightenment to benefit all beings? What can I do to express compassion today? And so, but my point here is this: is that even if we don't have that level yet, the way you get there is you cultivate it on purpose. So when you wake up, instead of, if that's not your immediate first thought, then you think, okay, let me think a little about bodhicitta before I get up. Or as I start to do my day, let me think about that. And then as I go about my day, let me keep remembering that and coming back to it, because it's not my natural baseline, but I can keep reminding myself. And what the teachings say is that is how it becomes your baseline. It doesn't happen through some magical trick or something. It's just you keep coming back to love, compassion, bodhicitta. And as you habituate your mind to that, it becomes easier and easier and easier until it becomes natural. Is there one or two quick questions before we start? Yeah.
How many zillions of lifetimes does that actually take?
Well, Milarepa did it in one. He wasn't a bodhisattva to start with, and he did. So it's up to us. What Milarepa's life, I'd love to brought up Milarepa. He's one of my favorite characters. And what Milarepa's life, I think, gets at, and is that it's up to us. And actually, I'll share a personal story, or at least that point about effort. It's how much effort. And Milarepa mainly made a lot of effort. And I mentioned Rebroom share. One day I went to him and I said, Rinpoche, there's a teaching I've read that says like there are different levels of practitioners. Like some will achieve enlightenment in this life, some at the time of death. For some, it'll take a few lifetimes. For some, it'll take many. And I said, I think for me, I'm on the track of many. I'd like to move up in the rankings. How do I do that? And he said, practice a lot. Any other questions? So it was like, it's how much effort we put in is the answer to that question. That's what Milarepa's life says, right? It was like he made so much effort. That's how he did it so quickly. If we make less effort, it'll be slower. And that's just practical. It's not like something, it's not like a moralistic judgment. It's just like, it's habituation. It's like how much inner effort. It's not external effort. In this case, it's mental effort. Because it's the mind training mainly. And then Robin has her hand up.
I was just going to make a comment. I was just looking at the introduction of the 6 yogas of Naropa, and you had a comment or a quote from Geshe Chenua. I think he was a Kadampa Geshe, maybe.
That's right, yeah.
The 4 aspects. The first one being worldly people cherish the Buddhas more than sentient beings. And that one, it just knocked me across the room thinking about that. We do, that the Buddhas are going to bring us an enlightenment or bring us everything that we want and need. But we never think on a daily basis that it's all of these beings that we're surrounded by that are going to do it. And I've been thinking about that all week. So it's just brilliant. And the other 3 or personal happiness more than suffering. Another one, like what? And when you think about Rinpoche, Rinpoche, oh my gosh, the suffering that this man endured in this lifetime, and came to see it as something truly the most beneficial thing for him. And then the one that people who help them more, people who help us more than those who harm us, we cherish them more. And then myself more than others. Oh yeah, sure, that's pretty apparent. But those others are like, what a transformation of mind. It's mind training, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, just had to share that because that's been with me all week. It's like, yeah, I've got a wall of of tankas that I adore these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But what about a wall of my biggest enemies?
Good idea. If you put that out, let me know.
What people would
If
think,
you do
what?
put up a wall like that, let me know. Yeah, I'll be curious to hear about it.
Anyway,
Quote
thank
about that on the whiteboard
Yeah.
in my office.
What's the
Like
question?
it's about like the great gift of patience that your enemies provide you, and like what a wonderful thing to have enemies because they provide you with this great gift of teaching an opportunity to learn patience. And where I work right now is pretty hostile, so keeping that behind my desk is I look at it every day.
You heard Ryan there, yeah. And then John, and then maybe we'll stop after that.
Yeah,
So
you were talking earlier about, as I understood it, when you were sitting with Reba Rinpoche and kind of contemplating, what's in his mind, how he's seeing the world and experiencing it. And I think that's just a wonderful exercise, to try to get outside of your own mind and think about what's in the mind of somebody who's apparently highly realized. And so some of you may have heard Kangsa Rinpoche speak. He's been on Wisdom Dharma chats a few times, and he's got just some wonderful stories that are very funny and also very insightful. So he was relating one where this person was sitting with his lama, and hopefully everybody's still with me. My video kind of blinked
yeah, yeah.
out,
No, we're
but
good.
so he asked his lama. He said, "I'm curious. How do you see me?" And his lama responded, "I see a Buddha." And then so the Lama then said, "How do you see me?" And he said, "Well, frankly, I just see garbage." You know? So when this person got home and he was speaking with his wife, he related this story, how the Lama had conveyed that when he looked at him that he saw a Buddha. And he very honestly responded to the Lama's question that he actually just saw garbage. And his wife just laughed uproariously, saying, "You don't get it, do you? The world doesn't exist, in its own right. It exists as a reflection of your own mind." So, so that was just a very good teaching, for him from his wife, that he has a lot of purification to do. So and again, that helps me a lot just to think about, especially when I'm feeling sorry for myself and it's appearing like there's a lot of enemies in my life, just to think about, for one thing, I have a lot of purification to do, and the world's not existing in its own right, and also just it helps me so much when I'm around cheerful people who nothing seems to bother them. So
Oh, that's great. Thanks, John. He had a wise wife thing.
yeah,
But
I mean, karma is just so ironclad. The way the appearances of the world deceive us, is just so utterly persuasive, right? So that's why it's so hard to get out of samsara. So we need good guides. Yeah, thank you for teaching, Lauren.
thank you. And we should stop. I guess I will do the verse of, I'll do a couple, just dedicate the karma. The supreme jewel bodhicitta, for it has not arisen, may it rise and grow. For it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all powerful Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. I dedicate all these merits, which are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side. So the I, who is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side. May achieve Buddha's enlightenment, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side. Or lead all sentient beings, merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, to the state of enlightenment as quickly as possible. And may we all be able to you know, practice the kind of path that Shantideva is describing, and actualize the benefits that he's describing of bodhicitta.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, everybody.
Excellent.
Thank you, Lord.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Thank you.